welcome back to our channel. All right, so today we're diving into something that's been creating a lot of buzz lately, pun intended, the 2025 VW ID. Buzz? It's got that classic VW bus look, that sort of retro vibe, but with a modern, all-electric twist. Now, we're working with VW's official info here, so keep in mind some of the details are still a bit fuzzy. But if you're into EVs, love a bit of nostalgia, or just want to see if this thing lives up to the hype, then buckle up, because this deep dive is for you.
It's really interesting to see how VW is trying to walk that tightrope between nostalgia and, what modern EV buyers are actually looking for.
Right, like how big IS this thing actually. VW keeps comparing it to their Atlas Cross Sport, which is already a pretty big SUV. So like, are we talking minivan territory here or what?
Yeah, so we're talking roughly 195 inches long, 78 inches wide, and 75 inches tall for the ID. Buzz, to put that in perspective, that's even longer than the standard wheelbase version of the old VW bus.
Wow, I did not realize it was that big. That's a lot of space. For families, for hauling stuff around, it's a good amount of space.
It really is. It's interesting, though, because we don't really have many electric vans on the market yet to compare it to. Most manufacturers are focused on, SUVs and sedans and such. So the ID Buzz is really trying to, carve out its own little niche.
It's like they're saying, hey, remember road trips? Well, now they can be electric. But speaking of electric, what kind of juice are we talking about here?
So VW has confirmed a 91 kilowatt battery, which is pretty substantial. It's larger than what you'd find in most standard EVs today.
Okay, so that's pretty good, right?
Yeah, it's a good sign.
But I feel like VW is being very secretive about the actual range. Like, how far can this thing actually go on a single charge?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And unfortunately, VW is still keeping that card pretty close to their chest. Now, just based on the battery size and the type of vehicle, we could see a range somewhere between 250 to 300 miles, maybe even a bit more, depending on how aerodynamic they've made it. But until we get those official numbers, it's all just kind of, speculation.
And that range is going to be a huge deal for anyone thinking about buying one, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Range anxiety is a real thing, especially for families or anyone who, needs to travel longer distances.
Yeah, nobody wants to be stranded on a road trip with a dead battery. Okay, so we've got size, we've got battery, but now for the part that I always get a little nervous about, the price tag. VW announced a starting price of $59,995.
Yeah, that's a pretty penny, especially when you consider that there's no federal tax credit available since the ID Buzz is being assembled outside of North America.
Ouch. Yeah, that kind of hurts. Without that tax credit, it really puts the ID Buzz in a different category when you're comparing it to other EVs on the market price-wise.
Definitely. It's going head-to-head with some of the higher-end electric SUVs out there.
Yeah.
So VW is definitely banking on that, nostalgia factor, that unique design to justify that price point.
Yeah, they're really leaning into those retro vibes. Two-tone paint options, those Giphy sticker packs, remember those? They've even got a custom graphics program so you can personalize your Buzz. It's kind of a lot. Part of me loves it, but part of me wonders if it's enough to justify, that price.
It's a clever marketing strategy for sure. They're tapping into that emotional connection people have with the classic VW bus, while also trying to attract buyers who are looking for something, unique, something that stands out.
It's like they're trying to appeal to my inner child A&D, my practical adult self at the same time.
Exactly. And that brings up an important question. Is nostalgia enough to convince buyers at that price point? Especially when there are other, maybe more practical EV options available.
Right. And speaking of options, there's one major difference between the US version of the ID Buzz and what's available in Europe. We're only getting the 3-row long wheelbase version, no 2-row option like they have overseas.
That's a really interesting point, and it might tell us a lot about who VW is targeting with this vehicle in the U.S. market.
Now, for those of us who don't speak car, what does long wheelbase even mean?
Sure. So basically, it means we're getting a longer version of the van, which usually means more space inside, especially for passengers in that 3rd row, and more cargo space, too.
So more room for, kids, groceries, all the essentials.
Exactly. And that decision to only offer the 3-row version here in the U.S., that likely comes down to market research and, understanding what American car buyers are looking for.
So they've done their homework, but does this, limitation actually hurt VW here?
It's hard to say for sure. On one hand, Americans do tend to go for larger vehicles, more passenger space, more cargo space. And we also tend to drive longer distances.
Yeah, we love our road trips here in the U.S.
Right. So offering that extra space and potentially a longer range makes sense in that context.
Mm.
However, some buyers, maybe those in urban areas or those who don't need a ton of space,
Mm.
might be interested in a smaller, more agile, two-row version.
It's a gamble for sure.
It is. They're putting all their eggs in one basket, hoping that this three-row ID buzz is going to be the big hit they're hoping for.
And it really highlights that tension we were talking about earlier. Can the ID Buzz be both a nostalgia trip and a practical choice for today's EV buyer?
Exactly. It's a question we're going to keep coming back to as we dive deeper into the ID buzz.
So we've established that the ID Buzz is roomy. It's got that retro cool thing going on, but it's also, well, it's got a price tag that might give some folks pause. But can it actually live up to, like, the legacy of the VW bus? Because that's a tough act to follow.
It really is. I mean, the VW bus, it represents like freedom, adventure, that kind of counterculture coolness.
Yeah.
It's an icon, It's hard to imagine any vehicle, even one as stylish as the ID buzz, capturing that same spirit.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to how it actually drives, The original VW bus, well, it wasn't exactly known for its speed or, like, handling, but it had this charm, this go-anywhere attitude. So what do we know so far about how the ID Buzz actually performs?
Well, that's the thing. VW has been pretty quiet about the specifics. We know it'll be available in both rear-wheel and all-wheel drive, which is great.
Yeah, that's good.
Gives you some options there. But in terms of like acceleration, horsepower, all that good stuff, we're still kind of in the dark.
Okay, so that's a little frustrating. But, I mean, we can hope, right? It's electric, so it's got to have at least a little pep in its step.
Oh, for sure. Electric motors have that instant torque, so I'd expect the ID Buzz to feel pretty zippy, especially compared to, its gas-guzzling ancestor. But yeah, until we see some actual numbers, it's hard to say for sure.
It's like they're making us wait for the really good stuff. And speaking of waiting, there's another part of the whole EV experience that can be, well, a bit of a pain point, especially for people who are used to just, like, pulling up to a gas station, charging. So how does the ID Buzz stack up when it comes to charging?
That is the million-dollar question for any EV, right?
Yeah.
And again, VW hasn't released specific details about charging speeds yet. But we can assume it'll be compatible with DC fast charging.
Which is good.
Which is essential for road trips, for sure.
Okay, so that's reassuring. But what about, like, everyday charging? If I'm just, driving around town, running errands, what kind of setup am I looking at?
Yeah, that's a great question. VW will probably offer a home charging solution. Most EV makers do these days. And, of course, you've got public charging stations, which are becoming more and more common.
It's true, it's true. It's funny, we often get so caught up in the car itself, but the charging infrastructure is almost as important as the car, isn't it?
It really is. The success of any EV depends not just on the car, but on how easy it is to charge. And that's something that's still developing, especially here in the U.S.
It's like we're in the Wild West of EVs still. Exciting, but, a little unpredictable at times. But okay, let's get back to the ID Buzz and this whole nostalgia thing. VW is really leaning into it, but I wonder, are they missing the mark a bit in terms of what people really want in an EV today? Like, is nostalgia enough?
It's a tough question. Nostalgia is a powerful tool, but it can only take you so far, right?
Exactly. Like, I might love the idea of, reliving those childhood road trip memories, but I still need a vehicle that actually works for my life now. And that means practicality, reliability, maybe even some of that cool cutting-edge technology that we've come to expect.
Right. Buyers today, they're savvy. They want range, performance, features that make their lives easier. VW seems to understand that, but have they actually delivered with the ID Buzz? That remains to be seen.
It feels like they're trying to be everything to everyone with this van. The nostalgia play for the older generation, the practicality for families, the electric innovation for the eco-conscious. It's a lot to juggle.
It is. And that brings us right back to that central question. Can the ID Buzz bridge that gap between, the past and the present? Can it evoke those warm feelings of the VW bus while still competing in the world of modern EVs?
It's a tall order, but I gotta say, even if they just get it, like, partially right, even if they just get people thinking differently about electric vans, I think that's a win. And speaking of wins, VW has actually highlighted a pretty cool perk for anyone thinking about buying an ID, Buzz the EV Lease Bonus. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is interesting. As we mentioned before, the ID, Buzz doesn't qualify for the federal tax credit, because it's being manufactured outside of North America. But VW is offering a lease bonus specifically for the ID Buzz. So that's good news for anyone thinking about leasing.
Yeah, it definitely takes a little sting out of that initial price. So what kind of, like, deals are we talking about here?
This is where it gets a little, well, a little fuzzy. VW hasn't released any specific numbers yet, and the actual bonus amount can change depending on a bunch of factors, your location, the dealership, the lease terms, all that.
Okay, so not as straightforward as we might like, but still, something to keep in mind, especially if you're on the fence about the ID buzz because of that price tag.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It could be a deciding factor for some buyers. But it all comes back to value, right? Is the ID. Buzz, even with this lease bonus, a good value compared to other EVs on the market?
That's the big question, isn't it? And to answer it, we really have to look beyond the nostalgia, beyond the marketing, and dig into the details. Okay, so we've talked size, battery range, that whole nostalgia thing, price tag. But for me, it always comes back to this. Does it deliver on that, that core VW bus promise of freedom, of functionality? Like, can you actually LIV with this thing?
That's what it all comes down to in the end.
Right.
Right. And it's not just about like copying the past, but making it work for today.
Mhm.
So practicality. We know the US is only getting that 3-row long wheelbase version, more space for people, more space for stuff. But what about the little things, the features, the design elements
Yeah.
that make a van actually functional for everyday life?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. So, like, hit us with the details. What's VW saying about the interior, the storage, all that good stuff?
Well, they've been hinting at a really configurable interior,
Okay.
which, makes sense if you're going for that whole like van life versatility.
Right.
Think like sliding seats, removable seats, maybe even adjustable tables, integrated storage, things like that.
Okay, now that's promising, but I've seen configurable go wrong before, like overly complicated systems, parts that break easily.
Oh, absolutely. It needs to be intuitive. It needs to be durable. And that's, I think, where VW's reputation comes in. They're known for making, solid, well-built vehicles. And their designs are usually pretty user-friendly. So fingers crossed, they'll bring that same approach to the ID.
It's like you kind of have to trust them on this one. We're putting a lot of faith in VW to get it right.
Yeah, and it's not just about the physical space. It's also about the technology. Families today, they want to be connected, right? They want entertainment systems, charging ports, all of that.
Oh, yeah. Those USB-C ports are going to be in high demand in a car full of kids.
Exactly. And it seems like VW is aware of that. I mean, their other ID models have pretty impressive infotainment systems, so I would expect, something similar, if not even more advanced, in the ID.
Okay, so it sounds like they're checking a lot of boxes when it comes to practicality, modern features, all that. But let's talk competition for a sec. Like, who is the ID buzz actually going up against in the US?
That's the interesting thing. It's kind of in a league of its own right now.
Yeah.
There aren't that many fully electric vans out there, especially not in this size and price range.
So they've got this unique opportunity to really corner the market,
Yeah.
right?
If they can capture those buyers who are looking for, an EV that's got space, that's got style, maybe a little bit of that nostalgia factor, then yeah, they could be onto something.
But it also means that, the pressure is on in. They're setting the standard here.
Exactly. The ID buzz has generated a ton of buzz, and now they've got to live up to it.
No pressure, VW.
Yeah.
All right, so to wrap this whole thing up, the ID. Buzz, it's roomy, it's stylish, it's definitely playing up that nostalgia, but it's also got a pretty hefty price tag and, well, some big shoes to fill. So what's the verdict? Are we pre-ordering ours or are we hitting the brakes on this one?
Well, I think the idea, Buzz is a really interesting example of how car makers are trying to, to appeal to both our hearts and our heads. It's definitely got that emotional pull with that retro design, but it's also trying to convince us that it's, a practical choice for today's world. Whether they can pull it off, honestly, only time will tell.
And that's where you, our listeners, come in. What do you think? Does the ID buzz have you dreaming of electric adventures? Or are you taking a more cautious wait-and-see approach? Let us know. This has been a deep dive into the 2025 VW ID. Buzz will be sure to keep you updated as more information comes out. Until next time. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more discussions like this.